Quick intro. We have a debate with CoolDog and Philosophical Zombie Hunter, and for this debate, CoolDog's taken the position that markets cannot effectively regulate themselves, and PZH is going to be taking the opposition. Just be a normal back and forth, no moderation or anything, and at the end we'll hold a voting poll if there's no concession from either debaters. So, CoolDog, since you're taking the affirmative, if you want to open up, go for it.
Yeah, so I must confess that it's been kind of busy, so you're not getting the full CoolDog treatment of a lot of prep work here. But essentially, my position is it doesn't seem to be the case that we can have markets without some type of third party that is not beholden to market forces to regulate markets for various reasons. I mean, the first one is obviously a sense of consumer protection, in which without a third party who isn't in it for the money, essentially, will be able to protect consumers from either dangerous products or predatory work practices. And it just seems to me to be the case that you can't have, and this metaphor will come up a lot, you can't have the wolves herding the sheep, in a sense, in that you can't let the market regulate itself, because all of the actors in there are interested in making a buck, and there isn't like a third-party check who has like an exterior benefit of the people type of idea to check the market forces. And so it'd be interesting to hear what type of solutions Philosophical Zombie Hunter has to this problem. But it just seems to me the case that a business that is unto its own, that will regulate itself and can keep the public in the dark about dangerous situations, and then not treat its workers well, et cetera, et cetera. It just doesn't seem to me the case that the market itself will check for that, due to the inherent efficiency for making money, which does not necessarily take into account important externalities efficiently. And so and again, I don't want my position to be construed as communist or even necessarily a socialist position. It's just that there needs to be some state regulation in order to protect consumers, and may even say, we might get into this, to keep monopolies and to keep a functioning market in and of itself. So I'll hand the floor off to PZH here and see where the discussion goes.
Thanks. So I actually wrote something down for a change.
Okay. Role reversal. Yay.
Because Coco had like 10 minutes like written down like really quickly, and I'm just going to read this out slowly and painfully. But yeah. So for this debate, we are here to discuss whether a free market can regulate itself, and to do so efficiently. During the debate, I will argue that the question isn't if the government would not regulate the market, then would the market be able to run unregulated? But instead, the question should be who should be the one regulating the market. Should it be bureaucrats in government with very little knowledge on the industry they regulate and very limited understanding on the unintended consequences their regulations cause? Or should it be a mixture of decentralized decision makers and industry bodies with expertise and local knowledge that will help regulate the market? The debate itself relates to a broader philosophy. If the market cannot regulate itself, then government has to always be there to regulate the market. If the government needs to regulate the market, it needs to grow to a significant size in order to do that. The bigger the market becomes, the more money that flows through it, the larger the government needs to be. The larger the government becomes, the more incentives big businesses have to lobby the government to pass regulations that negatively affect their competitors, or give those businesses subsidies, and in quite a few cases, invited to do so. The technical term for this is called regulatory capture. So in essence, the debate is a linchpin idea for the population to accept big governments and larger government intervention in our lives. I will argue against the idea by suggesting that things such as industry standard bodies, consumer groups, insurance, as well as market forces and court systems to settle disputes, can regulate markets effectively. Now, CoolDog, I will do this a bit differently. I will try to persuade you directly that markets can be regulated in such a way
Mm-hmm.
So I will feedback with you and ask you if you feel convinced by some of my arguments. So
Okay, yeah. So we can. I mean, I think you've laid it out pretty clearly, like the overall field of where this debate is going to go, and I agree with your characterizations of sort of the issues here at stake, right? And like my biggest issue is like, okay, let's talk it like on the first one, right? It's like, okay, you argue that the bureaucrats have limited knowledge, and so they don't really know what they're doing when they make these regulations, and so obviously people with knowledge of the industries will make better regulations. And of course there is like an epistemic problem here, which is an argument for a type of government where we do educate our representatives in a non-biased way. So this is like a question of what staff should I hire as a congressman, not a question about whether the government should regulate or not. And the reason being, and here's my big sticking point, right, is if you have private companies who are doing the regulating, whether you call that a standards board or some standards organization, right? They're still going to be, number one, beholden to the companies who send them their products because they're their direct customer. So they're going to want to cheat results for them. And then number two, right, is they themselves have a profit motive and could be instituted by one of these self-interested companies to then regulate themselves. And this de facto means that there's no check on lying to the public about things that are dangerous. There's no check on, for example, if you were buying, like, take an example of like alcohol, right? There's certain purity standards that you need. It might be cheaper to make a poisonous form of alcohol in small amounts, and there would be no reliable way for the consumer to know that their alcohol wasn't tampered with if there's no testing that can be done in the first place. At least with the government, and while it may not test every bottle or may be as efficient as we want at testing for harmful chemicals in various products or other dangerous things, right? At least they have the authority to do it and are not beholden to the profit motive or are self-interested in the same way that private companies are. And so I'd like to know a bit about how you think that these private regulators are going to work.
okay, I understand. So you're saying there's if the market has to if the same companies or companies in the same industry or don't have an incentive to be impartial, let's say,
Right.
to the people that they monitor, that therefore that's that's not efficient and you can get bad results from it. So I'll argue that I'll give four examples to what you said. So with industry standard bodies, it would be a adjacent industry. So for example, you could have a situation where like a large supermarket chain, let's say Walmart, or in the UK it would be Tesco, and they have suppliers, let's say for potatoes or alcohol, and those things are grown somewhere. Currently, in our day and age, two sorts of inspectors are sent to those kinds of areas. One is a government inspector, and one is an inspector from a standards body. So, for example, in this case, the like Walmart or Tesco, they're the paying customer of the industry standard body, and they're interested in getting the best quality food, because otherwise they'll get sued by the customer, so on and so forth.
Right. They have their own particular policies that they want their products to fit to. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So in currently at that age, I'll just say quickly the government one is very, very lax. Like the regulations or the laws are the people that go to the farms, for example, or they go to where it's produced, they're very, very lax. The industry standard body is like 10 times more stringent and difficult with those suppliers. In addition, I said I'll give you three. So we have consumer groups. So let's say, for example, with alcohol, you have like a website that says these are good alcohols. They give them a star from 1 to 5. And if the alcohol does well, they get a sticker saying this is 2 or 3 consumer goods like our alcohol.
Sure. Like that review I'm writing about the place I went to last night. I get it. Right.
Yeah. So that in your example, that would be a recommendation system.
Right.
Like an Amazon, like regular people. The consumer group would be like more professional. But of course, you can have like regular people like Amazon or Yelp that give some review.
Sure.
And if, for example, someone sold alcohol that made someone go blind or cheated
Sure.
someone, there are court systems in the case of damage, harm, and fraud that could mitigate that. In addition, there could be business insurance. So if, for example, the alcohol company they need insurance, so they won't. So if they get sued, it will go to the insurance and not them themselves. And the business insurance could set some standards that they have to meet in order for them to get
Sure.
insurance. So there are some, and of course, like if in general market forces, supply and demand, you get a bad reputation, you get a bad name, someone got hurt from it, or someone took it to the lab and say actually they're cheating you. They'll get a bad name, and people will buy less from them, and someone else will fill that market, and they will never recapture that market share.
Sure.
All the investment in their business will go away.
Right. Sure. So there is a check on it. I understand what you're saying, and so let's tackle them like somewhat consecutively, right? So the industry standard bodies, and this was like the agricultural products example with the government inspector and like the standards inspector. So while I agree that you're a private company, you have certain business practices that have proven successful, and there are cases where you inspect for certain properties of your product to make it appealing to customers, right? So I agree with that those can be stricter than, because those are like subjective aesthetic judgments in many regards, or for product quality. But this only, and the danger here is that this can only happen once we've set sort of a bottom floor standard. The idea here being is that once we no longer have to meet certain standards, whether that be for how you treat your workers, what type of products you're pushing to markets, etc., right? Then without that bottom tier level, it may be the case that in your supply and demand, your opportunity cost calculations, right, and your expected value calculations, that actually doing a product that is of lower quality than our current government standards, this might be more dangerous, will end up being so much cheaper to produce that it's worth the risk. And so the question is about backsliding. And then the other thing that I really want to talk about, and we can talk more about the details about like how the consumer rating systems will do, although I think that's a secondary point, is about this court system idea, right? But I want to argue that like if I advertise to you that we'll use alcohol as an example. I am drinking a glass of wine. So like let's say the alcohol wine bottle is at 12%. It says 12%, right? There's some form of regulation here in place to say that if you market a product in a certain way, that your statements have to be veridical, right? They have to be true, right? Certain types of statements have to be true, and that's a type of regulation on advertising. So completely self-regulating the market without any form of regulations about how and what you can advertise on, I don't think that you can sue over that now. Right. Like your court system cannot allow a consumer to sue over that because the corporation is perfectly within their right to print whatever they want. Right. And that's a type of regulation to restrict the types of claims that they can make and what evidentiary burden they have to meet in order to make claims on advertising. Right. So I'll throw it back to you, and we can talk about the consumer ratings if you want. But these are the two more interesting points: is the backsliding and then the advertisement court system question.
Okay, so I think there were 4 points there. So I would say, with regards to regulations being a minimum standard or meeting a minimum standard, I think it is true that currently you have regulations set by the government or by bodies in the government, and people often, what happens is they switch off their thinking and they say, well, I just have to meet the regulation and I'll do the bare minimum to do that because I don't want to get sued. And if, for example, I do get sued, I'll just say, well, I met the regulation.
Right.
I think there needs to be an opposite switch. I think there needs to be, well, look, there is no, let's say there is no someone telling you what to meet, and even if they do, that's not enough. You need to think like how to make it better quality, safer. And if it's not, if something happens, you're responsible, or you could be responsible. You could be dragged to court. So if you want to avoid that, you need to think about the spirit of the laws and not the actual definition, like the literal definition of the laws. And that is to make a product better, safer, and things of that nature. I would like to say that these regulations just literally make people switch off their brain and just meet the bare minimum. It's very common. With regards to risk on cheap products because it's better, I don't agree here. If you have the definition is I have a very short-term business and I'm willing to make some cheap products. I'm willing to take the risk to be discovered, and then all my investment and all my time and all my effort and all the shareholders and all those things will just lose out money very quickly once I'm discovered. I think it's too high of a risk. I mean, even if you're cheap, then then say you are cheap. This is cheap. This is what I'm doing cheap. But you can't, at the very least, like if you're giving a poor quality product, then or you're giving like let's say a value product, which meets 80% of people's need, then that still could be okay. But if you're cheap in the sense of harming people, then you are risking even more. You're risking your freedom. With regards to court systems, I mean, I'll deal specifically with the bad advertising, but well, actually, I can say now, to some degree, like either you can go to court and say, well, you said this, and it's the opposite, therefore you have some sort of fraud, and you advertise some sort of expectation, and you didn't meet that, and you could go through a lengthy court process. I mean, I don't know if it is lengthy or isn't lengthy. You could approach the.
You gotta get paid, man. It's gonna be long as hell.
So it depends. The problem is with the court system now is that the rules are very subjective. It's very much up to interpretation of the judge, which means that you need a lengthier court process, you need more judges, you need more time in between for preparation. And in order to reverse that, you need the laws to be more objective and clear. So, if you broke the law, you don't need 12 lawyers to tell you that you have actually broken the law. You would know that you're breaking the law, and it should be very clear. And if it's very clear, then decisions could be made quicker, and therefore the whole system kind of, well, I wouldn't say collapses, but at least self-optimizes. I think you can either approach the court system and say this is fraud, or you could approach the advertisers and say, or any of the bodies I mentioned before, including the advertisers, say, look, the advertising platform, the person who's advertising on your platform is a charlatan, and you're going to get a bad name from that person. So I suggest you remove it. And you can speak to the standards body if there is one. You can speak to consumer group if there is one. You can go on television and tell people. At the end of the day, it's not good business practice to lie to your customers. Eventually, you'll get found out and you lose your whole market share and all your investments and all your hard work. It's not worth it.
I got you. So let's talk about this point exactly. And I think that the idea being here, and it's kind of in both points. So I'm going to tackle the psychological point first, right? Which is you said like on the minimum standards required, like dialogue tree, that when we impose these like basement level, like foundational regulations, and I agree with you, some people switch off their brain and they only meet the regulations and that's all that they do. There's 2 points here. Number one, this is an argument for, as I think we both agree on, more clear and very strict and better regulations than we want now. So there's a reformist possibility here that the current regulations are too low, which is leading to unsafe practices, right? And the second point is that psychologically, I think that when you remove that base level, then people will switch their brains off in a different way, which is how can I make this piece of shit as cheap as possible? Which gets to the point that you closed that. You say that like poor quality, dangerous products won't survive, right? So I have 2 things, right? Number one is that all those cheap Chinese bullshit manufacturing companies that just rotate off plastic cheap shit and just make one lot of them, sell all of that, and then make some other lot of it, for basically nothing is a viable business model where you cycle your production and cycle your branding. And there are horrendous examples of like dangerous electronic devices. My favorite one is an electric shower heater that can electrocute you. You screw it on to your shower head and water goes over live current. Right, hella dangerous, but that company just switches its branding and they're fine to make cheap shit. And the second point here is look at a company of good repute, like Apple, for example, has consistently made shittier products that break easier and are less serviceable and repairable, right, and are way more expensive than their counterparts and are of lower quality, right, lower technical quality, not aesthetic, branded quality, whatever. Right, and they're still incredibly successful due to the aesthetic. Now, on the court system check, I think that we have a real disagreement here, in that I think that when you say a market can regulate itself completely, as I think the proposition is, I don't think that you can regulate what I can print on a billboard. So, like, what legal remedy are you referencing than some type of law, which is in effect a regulation on advertisement? You need some base level laws in order to define what is and is not acceptable. Putting poison in a food product is not acceptable, and that's a regulation that the government is imposing. It's okay to sell poison as a drain cleaner, but it's not okay to put drain cleaner in a food product. A ridiculous example, right? But it would be unacceptable to do that, and that needs to be a law, for example, that you can't have pesticides on the vegetables you buy. Right? That has to be enshrined in law, and that is a de facto and de jure, we could even say, both at the same reason that we need regulation is at this base level of law, so the consumer does have a legal outlet, and so we can pick up from there.
Okay, so I'll start off from the beginning. So I would say the idea with standards body is you kind of move away from regulations to just like high quality standards. So you move away from the bottom and you focus on the top. Like how can I make my product the best, meet the highest standards, because everyone else is doing it. Everyone else is in my industry is looking up. They're not looking to meet the bare minimum. Everyone is looking up, and I want to compete with them, so I have to get better standards. And I think that overall is like a better approach to long-term selling, which is what people are in business for. With the cheap
question of clarity here. When you say standards, you're talking about like some qualitative, like a quality assessment of the product, as opposed to like a minimum bar to clear, right?
Yeah, some kind of element of the product. So it can either be like sturdiness or safety or security or meets the requirements of things.
Like car ratings that we have in the US. We have those. Like,
yeah, like in car ratings, you have like different areas, like I don't know, like how smooth it is on the road and how well it does in an accident, and if accident from the side, from the front, from the back, and all sorts of things like that. So I would say like aim companies need to aim higher, and instead of just like meeting the bare minimum, everyone is in it to outdo the competitor with a better quality product. Now they can like make like a better value product as well, but that's part of the cost. With regards to cheap Chinese products, I mean, I don't know specifically about the example you gave. I am familiar with Amazon having these Chinese products.
Yeah.
That just change or look very same picture and just like have like different naming, but it's essentially the same picture on Amazon. I mean,
the stupid shit on Wish.com and those like outlet bullshit Chinese cheap shit, whatever it is, whatever, right?
I mean, within Amazon, you'll have people reviewing it, but I am aware that even through that, like they start like a brand new product with no stars because they've run out of the bad reviews from a previous product. But it's again through that system, like at least you have some visibility of what other people think that bought it, and they can try to keep gaming the system to some degree, but I think long term it's a hard sell. Like at some point you just have to say, well, look, I have these people in my factory. I'm getting all these all these plastic components, and I'm making something together. I'm sending it over to America, and they keep giving it back to Amazon. Amazon's not paying me because you can return a product if you don't like it. Amazon's not paying me, and it's not worth it. I have to actually improve my product to meet like a higher standard and be cheap. Like it has to provide good value and like a good price for me to sell to this market. Whereas, let's say the locals are very expensive, and I can perhaps compete there. But at the very minimum, it has to satisfy some kind of base concept of value with the customers. Poisonous food. So poison in food. Sorry. So that is you are harming someone. You will lose your freedom. You will go to prison. Someone will. At the very least, if unless there's corruption behind something. But if you put poison in food, even by mistake, like it seeped in there from some, you have a good chance of losing your freedom, and that's not worth the money. With regards to like advertising, you have the freedom of speech, but if you're making a claim about your product and that's a false claim, that is a form of fraud, and that is again something that can be taken to court. And again, like just from market forces, there's someone in the market that's telling lies. I don't want to buy from them. All these people tell me this company is telling lies. I don't want to buy from them. At some point, you lose market share just because of it. I hope I answered your points. If I missed one, let me know.
Yeah, no, we're good. So staying on this, like the cheap Chinese shit topic, because I think this is going to end up being like kind of a voting issue a little bit down the line. So, and this is like on the court flow. So basically, right, you're saying, okay, you're directly harming someone, right? Directly harming somebody by mistakenly putting poison on your food. Well, it's really about like the washing process that they do before they send it to Kroger, Walmart, etc. Right? Like that's really where it's happening, because you can't say the use of pesticides in and of themselves constitute a crime if someone accidentally gets poisoned by them, right? Right? Come on. Or like if I go and eat a recently sprayed field, something off of that, then that's obviously on my dumb ass, right? So there's that, right? And so the question is, who is like responsible in the legal sense for this, right? Who's responsible in the legal sense for this? And it's the person who was washing the vegetables, right? Because it was their mistake not to wash them well enough, right? And that's offloading the responsibility from the people who put in these dangerous systems of production, at which point it's hard to regulate the safety of your product due to the cheaper production system that has been done. And so the people who are actually making the decisions that led to this are not going to be directly liable or directly punishable unless you have some type of minimum bar to meet, to where there's a certain acceptable level of pesticide that gets onto the food product, right? And so that's my response to that. And so you need some type of regulation to stop the harmful business systems and practices, as opposed to the particular lack of washing a particular vegetable. So now going on to like the cheap Chinese shit product, right? I would agree with you if it wasn't the case that a ton of these products are that these business practices are like successful, right? Like the fact that there is a proliferation to such an nth degree of these products indicates that a lot of people have decided that it's worth the cost to produce them in the first place. We have so many people who are willing to do that, then this is the result. Additionally, is the lack of labor regulations in those countries that is allowing them to bring a product to market at a cheaper cost, to which point, right, they can afford to care less about what their brand image is, right? They're just trying to sell to somebody who needs a tool for one occasion or some stupid gag gift for somebody, right? And who cares if it's safe or not, right? They're only, the company reputation isn't as important as price point for certain items. Certain demands are tremendously more elastic than others, is to say on that. Now, going back to the switching off brain, need to go to, and I think it's a great way of putting it. I think you're very eloquent on this point about the way that we should move to a more qualitative assessment of standards as opposed to bare minimum style regulations, right? And so here, right, on one hand, we have a regulated market currently, right? And you claim that we have some effect from these consumer reviews. How do we know that the effect will be more pronounced enough to step in and cause people to start thinking about quality so much when we could think about with no regulations, right? Whenever we loosen regulations, we see an increase of innovative thinking, right? It is innovative thinking and good thinking to make a product as cheaply as possible to hit like a bare minimum in order to undercut my competitors, right? I think that your analysis of this isn't doing enough on the cost end and the demand elasticity that certain products have, like airline flights is an example, right? Airline flights, you want the cheapest flight possible that's going to get you there without crashing, right? And so if I'm a company and I'm allowed to cut corners, I'm going to capture a huge share of the market and then sell off my company later. And after I've grown it by undercutting everybody, sell my shares later and hop out with the profits and let the company tank, right? And so there's definitely situations, especially in bankruptcy, in these situations, that the physical assets get distributed to competitors, right? And so things are more complex, and I think the cost element is lacking in this analysis on this side of the flow. So I'll leave it back to you.
Okay. So the pesticide on food. I think if you're selling a product to a customer and you're saying, well, there is poison here, and it's your problem if you deal with it, I don't think that's acceptable necessarily. I think that if you are let's say selling lettuce or something, or like lettuce in a bag, the company may be the one responsible to wash it off to some degree. If you're saying that the pesticide is like mostly harmless, maybe. But if it's like severe and it even in like the near medium term, it can cause severe issues, then you can be taken to court. You can fall under all these consumer groups that say, I've bought your product and now my child has this, and so you have both sides of the coin here. Both the court and the market will react negatively to this sort of thing. And to some degree, like let's say if the entire market was doing pesticides and these stories started to become more and more popular, I would say that at some point, like some people would complain, some people would get hurt, and then and some companies would go to court, which as a result causes the producers to change their habits. But at least that's what would seem logical to me. With regards to Chinese having very cheap labor and they can afford to do these things. I mean, look, to some degree, I'm aware that on Amazon, some of those Chinese stuff are actually very popular and get like a lot of stars. So I know there's a guy that reviews like hardware stuff, and he did like do a segment where you had like $20 earbuds and like they had like 1,000 stars, and like it's a value product, so it's like it's cheap, but it meets like 80 or 90% of your requirements, and people are okay, it's cheap. My expectations are not that high, and I'm happy with it overall. So some of those products do very well, but again, if like you're selling something that breaks, and Amazon, and let's say it's not Amazon, let's say it's eBay, it doesn't have like a policy for returns, you may think twice about buying these sorts of things. If you've done it one time, you won't do it a second time. If you buy something cheap on Amazon and breaks, you can send it back. Therefore, the producer doesn't get any value from it. But with regards to manufacturing, I'm not sure if this is known very well, but manufacturing is not so much people heavy nowadays. It's a lot of infrastructure. It's a lot of automation. It's a bit of a tangent here, but we've kind of left. So there used to be like a third world, which is like the majority of the people in the country on agriculture. We used to have second world, which is majority of the people employed in manufacturing, and we had first world, which is majority of the people employed in service sector. We've automated a lot of stuff nowadays, and China also is automating and buying a lot of robotic component parts to manufacturing, and that whole second layer is now dissolving. So if you have a third world country, so this is a problem to some third world countries. If you would normally have gone through the steps like in a Western society like 150 years ago, you go through an industrialization stage. That no longer is the case. So if someone is making something in China, they have invested in something. It's not the people anymore. In fact, you could make a case that the equipment is more expensive, is either cheaper than hiring so many people, but it does have an expense. So it's not as cheap as people think it is. With regards to disruptors, so yeah, you can make a product, and I was alluding to it in the previous statement. You can make a product that meets 80 to 90% of the people's needs in a particular industry, and it's way cheaper, and it disrupts the market, like for example the airline.
Yeah.
With regards to taking the money and then leaving, you will still be held liable to some degree. If there was a case where HP bought a software company from the UK for a lot of money, some billions, and then it turned out, and they bought it, like they gave the money and the owners walked away. And then it turns out it wasn't exactly, like the finances weren't exactly in order. They sued them, they went to court, they got some of the money back, and it was a big deal. And Amazon had to write off, HP had to write off like 8 billion worth of the company. Did I answer all that, or did I miss anything?
No, I think we're there. So I'm just gonna go over like the three main lines of discourse that we're going over there, so we can both be on the same page with how I see the structure at least. So we have the court system idea for checking the court argument. We have the question about if to prevent harm to consumers, the review systems and market image will work or not. And then we have the cheap Chinese shit flow, which is about that. Does that make sense?
I mean, I would like to think that the outright harm would be.
I haven't made an argument yet. I'm just asking, like, in terms of like argument structure, like debate structure here.
So regarding the argument, I would say that the harm prevention should be the code, but the consumer reviews should reduce the harm. I wouldn't say they prevent the harm, because someone had to be harmed and then you tell everyone. But I would say like the harm prevention should be the code. The harm reduction should be the market reacting to this. And I mean the cheap Chinese shit, some people like it. I mean as long I don't know what to say really.
Yeah. So before I start like on specific refutations though, I do want to ask an overarching question, which is, what is a regulation on your view? What is the definition of that?
So a regulation is the government passing a law about how they want a company or companies in an industry to act.
Okay.
That is, I think, the technical definition.
So it's any law, right? That the government does to make a company act in a certain particular way, correct?
So it's specifically the way the government wants it to act.
Okay.
So the part of the issue with regulatory capture is that consumer protection could be like a fraction of those regulations.
All right. So let's tackle, while we're here, let's tackle like this court argument, right?
Okay.
It seems to me to be the case, right, that what you call fraud is really an advertising company wanting to act in a specific way, right? correct?
I mean, if you made a statement about your product and there was an expectation about your product and it was
Right.
dishonest, then I mean,
But this is the government telling me as a company that I cannot be dishonest. I have to act truthfully. I have to behave in a certain way, the way that the government wants it, which is to make true statements. I don't want to make true statements. Government's telling me I have to make.
but this is nothing to do with regulation. This is just like lying to someone you trade with, and then you can go to court and say, well, you frauded me.
Is lying an action?
Maybe.
Yeah, you're saying something, right? Posting the billboard is an action, right?
Sure.
It's a type of action, right?
Okay.
That I am not allowed to perform because the government tells me I can't perform in that way. Otherwise, I'm liable for fraud.
So it's not per se the government here, or at least not the way I'm presenting it. It's you're telling your customers something about your product and you are lying to them, and then your customers discover this and say, well, you've defrauded me, and they take you to court. And they have to prove that they have been defrauded.
Right. I get that back end, but they're defrauding them on what basis? A law that the government passes.
No.
No? The courts don't, you're not held liable under a law?
So again, you stated something about your product or service, which turned out to be a lie.
Correct.
And you go to court and say, well, you told me this and it turned out not to be true, and I paid money because of this reason, and now you've defrauded me, so give me my money back.
So there is a law in place that says I cannot advertise falsely.
So fraud is a sort of way of fraud is a sort of theft.
I understand it. I think it's a good law. I think we both agree it's a good law, but it's a type of regulation on corporate behavior.
You can have fraud between regular people. No, I'm pretty sure.
Sure, you can, or a corporation, or a person. Exactly, yeah. But that's
a
regulation on behavior.
Well, I don't think it's a regulation. I think that I'm pretty sure the fraud is in the area of theft. Like someone lied to you, so you would give them the money, then they walked off or something like that. It's sort of within the area of theft and property rights.
So under what law would it be illegal for me as a antidepressant manufacturer to make an antidepressant drug, pay off some doctors, literally bribe some doctors because there's no regulation here? I can send them a boatload of money that says for every depressed person, give them this medication and I'll give you $200K, right? What would prevent somebody from doing that and not telling the consumer in the advertisements and not telling the doctors about the side effects that they have discovered, right? They're paying off all of the people who have the knowledge to blow the whistle, right? And they're making a boatload of money on upcharging people on some cheap shit that they've advertised, and there's no studies to counteract that because they're paying people off, right? You need some type of regulation to prevent fraud here, right? The type of fraud that we both think shouldn't happen, but when you're allowing people to where there can be no government restriction on corporate behavior whatsoever, the corporation can do whatever act it wants. I think this is in direct contradiction with things like fraud, with things like disastrously unsafe products, right? Where it's a more direct harm, right? Not just like base fraud, but fraud with actually injuring somebody, right?
Okay, so let me just summarize your position, because I have something to say towards it.
Yes.
I've actually had a debate.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say I actually had a debate with Radhi about something similar. But let me just see if I got this correct. A company bribed some doctors, or a lot of doctors, for the doctors to then defraud their customers and sell those things. And you're saying we need regulations for those.
It kills 10% of them, but the other 70% are happy.
Right, but why did they need to bribe them? Because bribe is already illegal, but go on.
Why is bribing illegal? Why can I not pay? That's a corporate behavior. Me as AstraZeneca or Pfizer is going to give this hospital a boatload of money to make all of its doctors prescribe XYZ medication. Well, that's a corporate behavior. You're regulating my behavior.
Yeah, there are laws that you can't break the laws. What do you mean?
We need those laws to regulate corporate behavior.
Yeah, but bribing. But this is on a very primitive level of breaking laws.
Yeah,
you don't even need regulation for this. Like yet, you bribed someone and then they defrauded the customer. I do have something to say to it, but I'm not even at that level. You've done 2 illegal things now before I even get to my explanation.
But like I think again, your definition of a regulation is what again?
A bureaucrat in the government passes a law on companies for them to do something that the government wants.
The government wants you not to defraud people.
But what the court says, just in the area of property rights, you've already hit 1 or 2 things.
But the courts are part of the government. The courts are
right. Okay, but hold on. If you're saying that the court system protecting property rights is regulation, then that is like a fundamental thing for like free markets. It's property rights and voluntary exchange. So if I don't have property rights, if property rights equals regulation, then it isn't. It's the court system. The regulation are bureaucrats handing down like specific tasks or things you have to comply with. Typically, it's a fine if you don't do them. In very extreme cases, it's a court thing, but typically it's a fine. This is the area we're talking about.
Right. But like, here's the point, and the audience, you need vote on this. He has admitted that there needs to be a certain set of laws which govern corporate behavior in order to have a free market, namely laws about property. There needs to be property regulations in order for there to be a free market, for a market to exist. And so ergo, I think my side holds the prop. Right. So
I think that's a very serious sleight of hand. Because I think that's a very serious sleight of hand, CoolDog, to be honest. Because just for and I think I've had a consistent view here in my previous videos. For there to be capitalism, you have to have property. You have to have individual rights and property rights and voluntary exchange.
Right.
If you violate the property rights and individual rights, the government or the court system specifically is perfectly within its remit to resolve those. Otherwise, you'll have. It's not like an ANCAP thing. Otherwise, you'll have violence. You'll have like, well, you sold me something bad. I have a gun. I'm going to kill you. Like the state is there to step in and say, no, don't get violent. We'll solve this dispute, and we'll punish the person on your behalf. Like you don't have to do any violence. We'll do violence on your behalf because to prevent you from doing it. So we're your agent here. But it's not the same as it's not the same as a regulation.
Yeah. Okay. So this is clarification, right? In your system, you have a base set of laws, which can be something like if you harm someone, then blah, 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 whatever, right? And so that those are fundamental, but beyond that point, you can do whatever you want, essentially, right?
Well, I mean, we are discussing that now, technically.
Right. And so am I characterizing your position correctly?
So in general, like on a very basic level,
yes,
I mentioned before the property rights and voluntary exchange. The idea of voluntary exchange is that you have something that you want to sell. I want to buy this something, and your something is worth more to me than the money I'm holding, and my money is worth more to you than the thing you're holding. And we trade, and we both agree. We both benefit from this trade. So it's called win-win exchange.
Right.
And if you decide to, within that exchange, to lie, to defraud or something, then the government can do something about that because, again, fraud is a sort of theft in this context.
Right. But beyond that, you can do whatever else you want.
I don't know what that means, man. Maybe give me an example. So kill someone with a knife or something. What can I do?
No. why
Sell them a pie with like razor blades inside. What?
Why can't I give gifts to doctors? Why can't I give a gift to a doctor as a company?
To be honest, I'll have to look at it, but like, so I have something to say with regards to the regulation here, but with regards to bribery, it sounds to me like it's bribing. I don't know for sure if it falls on. I mean, it sounds illegal, like a court thing more than anything. I don't think it's a regulation.
On what basis would it?
I'll tell you what. I'll have to take that on notice. It's not. I have to take it on notice because I'm not familiar with the whole thing. If you question me, it just sounds to me like a bribe.
That's fine. But the point that I'm trying to make here is it seems like that when we start pushing more and more cases, like for example, like who is held liable if I have this certain procedure for washing vegetables, for example, right? And we'll say 5% of the time the vegetables have a harmful level of pesticide on them, right? What happens in your court system in these cases, and under what law are you prosecuting these people? In a sense, right? Am I never allowed as a company to have any pesticide found in my products without people like my CEO going to jail? Like what's the accountability structure here? Under what laws do we have set up which are not also regulations? And I think that this line between law and regulation gets blurred when we start talking about more real world cases in that type of thing, right? So I want your response to that, and then we can close the court flow. I'll let you have the last word on it.
So I think that if you sell a product that harms someone, that someone would have to prove that they were harmed by you, and as a result, you either have to pay them and risk maybe going to jail. If you're saying that 5% of the time you have pesticides and they are, you get a stomachache, but that's it, then, may not reach court. If it's 5% of the time it may kill someone or may kill someone in 2 weeks, then that's a court thing, I would say. If it's something like more long term and like after a while you can say, well, I took a blood test, in my blood I have this many pesticides, it's from you because I buy from you typically, or I can prove I buy from you typically. Like in the case of perhaps lead, you can say I have a certain amount of lead in my blood and I got it from your products.
Sure.
And you can make the case, so someone's been harmed and you can make the case that they've harmed you and they will have to compensate you and risk going to jail. With regards to like, maybe like a gray area, I'm not entirely sure, and I would say that like the market does have mechanisms to prevent other people from reaching that. You could have consumer groups that inform people, look, these pesticides are very harmful, these kinds of companies use this specifically harmful pesticide, it's not good for you, it's not good for the workers that put it on, it's very harmful, stay away from it. And the market may adjust just by loss of money, loss of profit from this sort of bad press. And with regards to specific harm, I would say that would be the court. So again, the market would reduce the incentive to sell under this method, and the courts would figure out specific harm. So if someone was harmed, then the market would reduce that harm, but the courts would prevent it.
So very quickly, and I do want you to have a response to this if you will, but
Sure.
It just seems to me that like when we talk about stomachache for two whatevers, right, versus killing someone in 2 weeks.
I think even stomach aches, I think you can make a fuss about.
Sure, but it seems like that you're creating a framework of like acceptable corporate behavior here.
Not necessarily. You can buy food from like a small restaurant and you can get a stomach ache and you can complain to them about it. Or even if if you're allergic to peanuts and they put peanuts in your food, you told them not to and they did it on purpose or on accident, you can take them to court. It's I don't know about necessarily jumping to mega corporations, but in general, it's like applies to everyone.
Well, I'm good for putting this court topic to bed and talk about cheap Chinese shit.
Cheap Chinese shit. Go ahead.
And then I don't know where you want to go from there. After that,
Well, I'm trying to persuade you, so you tell me what you'd like to talk about.
So like on and the audience can vote on the court shit. You guys vote, and I know you'll do me a solid on that one. But now the cheap Chinese shit, where I think I'm probably worse, is right. Do you know like Wish.com? Do you know this phenomenon?
I've not heard of this, so I know like Amazon and eBay, so that's about it.
Okay, no, honey. This is the emporium of cheap plastic bullshit, my guy. Like you go there and you know that there's a 50% chance that this is some bullshit, and it's definitely not what it says, right?
Oh, why do people buy it anyway?
Because it's cheap as hell.
Okay, so it's like a risk, like a 50-50 chance of getting what I want.
Yeah, and it's like fucking $4, $5 shit. Like you buy a $10 pair of headphones, who knows if they're good or not, right? But it's $10. Like who cares? Like it's the slot machine, but for physical products, right? Essentially, you know, this shopping addict fucking mentality or whatever, right? They're successful, and their return policy, let me tell you, is probably not very good. I've never bought anything off of them, but probably not very good, right? And so, like, there's always going to be a segment of the population who is basically motivated almost exclusively by cost, right? And that's what I think that your analysis leaves out. And when we talk about like the psychology, we talked about it of just meet the benchmark and fuck quality, right? And like, sure, that exists. But there's also like on the consumer side, and you got to protect stupid here a little bit, right? A little bit to avoid all the court cases we talked about. And that some people are like motivated almost exclusively by cost, and they have hella elastic demands, right? Especially poorer people, they're way more elastic than like middle class people or upper class people specifically. Off like that it's solely based on quality when we're talking about like the super rich. Middle class people can buy some luxury goods where it matters, and a lot of other things they can pay a little bit more for higher quality. But then you'll always have a segment of the population to where cost is the only factor, and you as a company, even if it reviews are like 4 stars, 3 stars, right, the people are still willing to risk it. And while the Wish.com is like the middle class slot machine version of this, if we deregulate it completely and more necessities were made available and shit like that, or things that like products that were dangerous or extremely lower quality but were marketed at a super low price point would do some harm to people who are so elastic in their demand curves.
So I can't relate to Wish.com, but we'd have something in the UK for poorer people, which even I shop in, to be honest. But with regards to like harm from this Wish.com place, if you do buy a Chinese product and it does actually, I don't know, cut your finger off or do something, would there be a process when you'd have to go to court? But I'm assuming that would be okay to do. Like people would do that if they get harmed.
Yeah, but like the point is though is like that
it's too cheap for them to do that, or what did you mean?
It's too difficult for them to do it because of the court system. I know that you and I both probably agree on some court reforms that we should do, but like it's a hassle, number one, and then number two, they're willing to take a certain level of harm before checking it, right? Before going to court over whatever small damages are for their whatever breaking that they bought for cheap shit, right? That they have to continually buy again, right? It's like a planned obsolescence idea, right?
Okay, I would say with regards to so I'm reminded of a movie with Kevin Spacey where he was like this infomercial guy, and he made like this stomach cruncher thing that chopped someone's finger off when they like got up, and like if they put their finger in the wrong place, it's a movie. They put the finger in the wrong place, the finger falls off. But basically, with regards to court systems, you have people with no win, no fee will just take 40%, like, and they'll jump on stuff like that. Like even if it's a a Chinese company way over there, or they'll sue Wish.com. They'll hold them liable to some if they can, and they will jump on something like that. I had another idea, but it escapes my brain. Anyway, but with regards to poor people, I don't know. Again, I don't relate to that Wish.com, but we do have something in the UK.
Sure.
Bargain.
I actually tree, whatever the fuck. You know what I'm talking about.
I actually think that poor people do. I think that not serving poor people, or people thinking that capitalist systems aren't designed to serve poor people, are missing like a trick. Because basically, Walmart is entirely structured around serving poor people, and they're quite rich. And we're here in the UK. We have Poundland, we have Asda, which is kind of like the Walmart locally,
yeah,
and they do very, very well. Now, look, I'm sure they have some sort of standards of their own, like that they meet. But in general, it's very cheap, and like maybe if I go there versus I go into a slightly and even there's a new one from Germany called Lidl, which is really popular. It's just they just have very like cheap setup, or like they don't have too many people working there. They put like a pallet of food in the middle of the aisle of something, and people just take it off and go pay for it. But like poor people are served very well, like in those kinds of areas, and a lot of companies make a lot of money from it. And in general, supermarkets are like they make 1% on every product. It's a very, very thin margin, but they're just doing a lot of it.
The point is, though, right, is that the poor people, if there's one product on the shelf that's like, if it's a cheap product, we'll say it's like $1 for normally, right?
Yep.
And there's a product that's in all respects equal, but 80 cents, they're going to pick the 80-cent product.
Right, so you're reminding me what I had in mind. So I would say this. I was working in a company when the 2008 recession hit, and we were talking about lowering our prices and stuff. I mean, I was just a tech guy, but they were talking about, look, people aren't necessarily interested in the bottom price. They're interested in good value. So if you're saying like something is $1 and something and 86 cents, if it meets their needs, then they will go for the 86 cents. But if the 86 cents something doesn't meet their need, it's not good enough value for them to not buy that. So if, let's say, they need rice, and there's like regular rice, which is, I don't know, let's say $1.86 again. Mm-hmm. So the $1 one is mostly okay, it's fine, but the 86 one that has stones in it. That some rice bits are too hard and they ruin your teeth. Ruining your teeth is a trip to the dentist. No, thank you. Yeah, or at the very least, like if it's rice, they have to sift it out.
Yeah, but poor people are willing to do that.
If they're willing to do that, then and it saves them money, like with regards to sifting stones, like they're willing to sit there and sift rice and take the stones out. Then it's a choice.
Both know that people prefer short-term gains over long-term gains. You and I both know that people value money in the short term more than they value it as like this abstract concept of what they'll have in the future. There've been many psychological studies on this.
So I would say this: they will choose the cheapest product that meets their needs. They won't choose a cheaper product that doesn't meet their needs.
Their assessment of what they need, of what their needs are, is also mutually influenced by the cost, but also discounts the future at the expense of the here and now, right?
Or I'm not sure.
Expense for the future. I got it reversed. Terrible.
I'm not sure I entirely agree. I entirely agree with what you're saying as like a cutthroat kind of market there. So I gave the example of the rice, but it could be too much work to sift through the rice. So if I chew it, I could have an issue with my teeth, which would cost me a trip to the dentist, which could be more than the value. But again, I see it as like you have the people will have a concept of value, and they would buy the cheapest product that meets that value, but they won't buy cheaper than that. So for example, when I was giving the 2008 example, our marketing person told us, look, they don't want cheap necessarily, they want good value. They want like So if you sell something that's $25 instead of 22, but that $25 does 3 things more than the 22, and that is good value. So just an example, and that is good value. So people want good value, not necessarily the cheapest.
But like there's another like example here that we can run, right? And here we're going to be talking about cars. We're going to be talking about farm equipment. We're going to be talking about technological devices. We're going to be talking about certain types of medical equipment that are like relatively high end. We can take
Let's say cars. Cars is a good cars and second-hand cars.
Yeah, as an example, right? Those products, right, are designed to in such a way that you could potentially incentivize people to buy a new car on a regular cycle due to like a planned obsolescence, right? Is okay, we give the customer, let's be generous, give them a 2-year warranty, right? Why is your mic so fucking loud? Too bad. Is that better now, Lee? But give them a 2-year warranty, right? And then after that 2-year warranty is up, now the customer has to pay for service on that, and they can design such a turn down your volume. Okay, I'm trying.
No, don't do it. Keep it up.
Okay, it's good. But basically, right, is that in order to get
I'm joking. Lee's upset at me now.
After that point of the 2-year warranty, right, you have to get it serviced, and you can design a product in such a way that only people who are associated with the corporation can service that vehicle. Like this is happening with John Deere tractors. This is happening with cars. There's been legislation actually to regulate this practice, to ban diagnostic tools from being unable to assess what problems with your car or whatever, right? And so without regulations here, companies can do that, and they can exploit people by making it a better value proposition for them to continually buy a new car, which is of worse quality, but nonetheless makes the corporation more money than if they built a good car, right? Like this is a calculation that you have to make. It's an expected value calculation, right? I'm sure fewer high-end customers may buy your product, but rich people buy a shitload of Apple products, and they have to rebuy those every 3 years when they break due to planned obsolescence, right? And so I think you're discounting this idea.
I mean, I'll say this. So I'm remembering a case where like if you bought like a BMW or Mercedes, like I don't know, some 10 years ago, then there would be an expectation that I don't know if you have to agree to it or it's like highly recommended that when you need to do services or MOT. Oh, sorry. When you do services or MOT for the first 3 years, you have to go to them. Well, you don't have to, but it's like expected or I don't know. It was like expected or something, and it was a very expensive MOT, and like you have to change all your 4 tires and all the discs every time, and like at some point. People like this is ridiculous and just went to like a regular MOT place or MOT is like a test you have to do in your car so you can keep it on the road. And I think people got fed up with it, and there were like dealers who like specialized in like high-end cars that did that. I don't really remember, but I think with the John Deere one, and I have to remind me if this is the case because I've only read something about it where they sell this like farm equipment, and all the farmers are interested in like late 80s John Deere trucks because they can replace the parts, and the new ones they cannot. So it's like the late 80s John Deere stuff is like
the reason they can't replace them is because in the computer that runs the car in some cases or runs the tractor won't let them turn it on. They can have the correct part, they can replace it, but because John Deere wants to extract a service charge on them, the tractor won't start because they replaced a part. That's it.
And why doesn't a competitor step in and say, "I will sell you farm equipment without this issue"?
Because they can make money on the same scheme too.
Right, but if they're the same as John Deere, then there's no difference. People can buy the previous. Why would someone not compete and say, "This is a solely needed hole in the market, and I'm going to come in and fill it"?
But because extracting the service cost gives you more money than selling to the additional people that this feature would appeal to.
Right, but
tractors.
I understand that, but the other competitor already in the market is doing that, so why not disrupt the market?
This market has no regulations in it, and this situation has emerged.
No, I don't. Then I don't agree that it doesn't have any regulation, because obviously, if they're acting so one-sided with the people, there must be some regulation. Otherwise, the competitor would just say, "Well, this is stupid. I'm just going to step in and take over all the market."
There's no regulation on the books that says
there must be. Then I can't. It doesn't sound like there isn't any regulation. It sounds like they are strong arming. It sounds like there is some sort of regulation that doesn't allow a competitor to step in. And because, for example, even like trucking companies can do something.
They're just passing laws now to prohibit this behavior.
I am aware of the right of repair laws.
Right. So there wasn't any regulation on this before. We got this shitty situation because we didn't have any regulation, and now we're fixing the problem. Like, I don't see the problem here. Like, what?
So in the case, I do think in the case of a John Deere, there is something preventing someone else from selling farm equipment. Let me say something about Apple, because Apple didn't let people open up their phones, or they made it very difficult, and you needed special screwdrivers. Some people obviously did do that. They did fix Apple products, and they kept them for longer. But even in the Apple space, there is competition. You can buy a Samsung, you can change the battery at home, you can buy other things. It wasn't like the only competitor. Obviously, they have a brand name, and people like that. And it makes them feel warm and fuzzy. But if the right of repair upsets you, you can buy a competitor. Whereas in the case of the John Deere one, there must be at least one competitor, surely.
But when you look at the technological market, Apple was the first one to do this, right? And they started making buku dollars. There's no law in the books that says you have to make your phone be repairable. There's no law in the books that says you have to make your phone closed or not closed, etc. No regulation. But now, what is Samsung doing now?
Well, one second.
Is making their phone harder to close, so you have to go through their warranty systems, and so the lack of regulation has fucked us once again. Right?
You have a variety. You have a variety of phone competitors at the moment, at the high end as well. With regards to Apple specifically, they were always a closed system. Apple was a closed system from the 80s. Like if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but if you had like discs and you stuck it in an Apple II, you can't stick it in you can't take that disc and put it in a compatible one.
Hardware. That's not the hardware level. That's not on the hardware.
Yeah. I understand, but their philosophy. Okay, look, I would say in the case of Apple, they were always this way. They wanted to be like a complete thing, and they didn't want people to
is converting to that way.
Sorry?
My old Samsung, I could open it up, but not my new one. I need special tools for it so that I can send it through their warranty system. They're all doing it now because they're making buku money. And no one cares about that shit anymore. I do, but I'm getting screwed, but other people don't.
To be honest, I'm aware of the right of repair. I will have to. I have to take it on notice. I would say the only thing that comes to mind is just that I don't know everything about everything. But
right, of course.
I think, as far as I know, the only thing that comes to mind that is similar is the airline industry, and basically, they deregulated something, and everyone was doing very cheap fares, and then like you couldn't have any new entrants in the market, but everyone had like cheap fares. So the only thing they could do at some point, they just started charging for bags and stuff like that, like $15 here, $25 there, all these sorts of fees. But the reason was at the time that no one could enter the market. Like they had lots of regulations, and even though like the fares were cheap, they were like playing around with the fees to make some cost. And at some point, the fees in and of themselves was like a huge revenue stream.
You are right to point to the fact, and I would encourage you to look at the right to repair stuff a little bit more deeply, because that might convince you that some regulations are needed. Obviously, without you looking at it, it's not going to be convincing here and now. But later, you might take a look at it. But right when we're talking about entry to market, and your point about the airline industries, you're 100% correct. Right, like entry to market is a huge issue that we have to take into account for. But when we look at something like a cell phone or other like heavy technological things, right, where it's not just like a service, essentially, it's like the airliner is essentially a service that repairs these planes and whatever, right, fares you. But when you're making a cell phone, there's a very high bar to entry from the get-go, right? So God, Walt, stop. So right, and so that idea is that when you have a high bar to entry in virtue of the product that you're selling, because of that, right, de facto you're not going to have enough market entrants who are not going to try to make the free money on the planned obsolescence gravy train, now that it's kind of become an expected sort of situation, right? And so you
isn't it the? Can I just ask one thing? So I would say this. I'm not entirely sure how many people are pissed off that they can't repair their phone like by themselves. Like maybe it's maybe it's not the case that it's the majority of the market care enough about it. I do know that Apple, and with regards to planned obsolescence, I do know that Apple specifically had like a low quarter or something, and the CEO said that people are just hanging on to their phones, their stuff for longer. And if you notice, like if you buy a phone, they pay you if you give them your old phone. So they'll charge us because people are just hanging on to it, and they're hanging on to it partly because they give it to like a local person in my high street that can repair or can send the battery or can change the screen for like £15, £80 for the screen, £50 for a battery, £80 for a screen, and they'll keep it for long. And I mean specifically Apple products. So I didn't approach Apple, or I didn't use Apple Care or Apple Pay or something like that. I don't actually think it was my phone; it was a family member. But people are managing to repair it, and it is pissing Apple off. And the planned obsolescence isn't as working as well. And for example, iPads. I know, like we have an iPad from 2013. A relative has an iPad from 2013.
There are methods that the company can put in place to prevent you from changing that battery.
Yeah, but we still have it for a long time. The Apple, like the laptops, can last at least 5 to 7 years without changing them. I mean, if you want the newest stuff,
but you know
you can.
Saying, right? Is that there's this slippage without regulation to where perfectly good technology is being wasted due to corporate interest of profit, right?
I mean,
harm that's being done to people, not a great harm. Well, I'm not saying it's some great harm, but it is a harm nonetheless.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'll take it on notice. To be honest, I'll review it. And I'll get back to you.
On the right of repair, then we can call it if you want.
Okay, let me just look over some of my points quickly.
Yeah, is there anything else?
I was kind of like really excited to say like all the bad regulations the government did, just like to spice things up. But I don't think it's relevant because there's a lot of bad regulations that the government passed. But so, like for example, if the standard was so the standard seemed to be like throughout this conversation is capitalists are wolves that are like you can't tell the market. Capitalists are the wolves, and you can't tell the wolves to guard the sheep. Right. And it's kind of like something that I've heard on the server, not from you, but I've heard from somewhere else on the server. And I was wondering before coming to this debate if the standard because we were talking about effectively, if the standard was better than the government, because that is like a super low bar. So I was wondering if that was going to be the case, but it was
criterion questions, and I did in fact say that because it's catchy. I like it because it's catchy. But yeah, so I think the standard for this debate is kind of interesting, especially what's the actual. We can do propositional analysis if you want. What is the actual prop language?
Markets cannot effectively regulate themselves.
Yeah. So I mean, like my understanding would be of this
So
project.
actually, before you go, I do know that I saw some YouTube clips where a guy went to like China and made his own phone to like parts and went like different, like literally like stores in like Shanghai and stuff. And he made like a clone of an iPhone. Like he bought from like 4 or 5 different places, and he ordered something, and then someone put it together for him for like $180 or something like that. It was like so if you want to like, because everything is like modularized and you get this part from
Right.
Germany and this part from Taiwan, and you could just put them, assemble them in China or whatnot. You can actually make a phone. I do think that there is actually quite a bit of innovation around it, and I have seen some. What is that thing where you crowdsource some money?
Yeah, Kickstarter.
Like Kickstarters for like a modularized phone where you can just replace the module. If like people are really unhappy about the right of repair, they could. I think it was a bit bulkier, and obviously, Apple has some kind of magic to it or whatnot. But if you were like those hardcore nerds, like back in the day when people were like installing Linux instead of Windows on their computers, you could play around with something like that. But it seems to me like a lot of people are happy about having these phones, and they're not doing too much about it. Maybe they grumble here and there. But if it really upset them, this right of repair, they could have had alternatives.
I just think that they just don't know what they're missing on a
Maybe, yeah, maybe, absolutely.
consumer targeted like because more like me and you will agree. Like you can read off a list of bad regulations, and I'll probably agree with 29 out of 30 on the list, right? That are bad regulations. But I think that there's a possibility, and a lot of the regulations are written from either a court to benefit corporations specifically with the regulatory capture shit that you were talking about, right? Or right, they're completely misinformed in the way that they're regulating, which was your knowledge argument, and we're going to agree. And I think that a lot of that comes from a lack of the primacy of the consumer protection and regulations and benefit for the consumer. And I think that our regulatory system doesn't do that. So
it's not. They're not incentivized to.
Right, exactly. And so I think that you're right in the sense that in our current political system, I think that you're right that the regulations that we are writing now are terrible, right? And our current political system does not have the people's interest. It doesn't allow the people's interest to be expressed in law, right? I agree with that. But my analysis of the proposition is it's not like this current market, but it's markets in general, like a general without like, I mean, we can disagree on the specifics of what regulations we want, but I think the bar here is to prove that a market with zero regulations, and I've let you more or less decide your definition, could actually have some type of moderating influence on what they put out, so that we don't have people keeling over from whatever, right? Or being given the shaft continually with lemon cars, right?
Okay, so I think if that is the standard, then I would ask you if you think I've met that standard.
Personally,
Yes.
I think that you've made me a little bit more weary of certain types of market forces and how regulations that bar entry to market need to be considered, as well as potentially. I still have to think a little bit about how much the public name brand stuff affects everything. But I don't think that on principle you've convinced me that we should have no regulations in an entirely free market.
Right, but in a theoretical world where we actually do have free markets, and bear in mind, when you have free markets, you eliminate that regulatory capture thing. That is kind of very much the point.
Right.
That is kind of very much the point that like big corporations do not have anyone to lobby for, and they just have to compete. They have no other choice but to actually make the customer happy. But in terms of like this theoretical market where we have elements of what we have today, but like more of them in that theoretical, is it not the case that I've demonstrated that markets can regulate themselves effectively. And bear in mind, I didn't answer everything, and there was some holes, but
I think that
overall,
my issue is that I don't think that the standards associations, while I do agree that a more qualitative approach would be good, I don't think that a private standard organization will check, because will check the potentiality for bad stuff. And I think that you're basically you're offloading the entire risk assessment to the consumer, to where they have to do two calculations. One is, what is the chance that this product is good faith, right? And then, is that enough risk that I'm willing to take, right? You're putting that onus on the consumer. And I think that a market without, and we haven't really talked about like labor, but like it's the same idea, right? But right, and so I think that you're offloading the risk to the consumers, and you don't, without regulations, you don't have an ability to ensure that the consumer's interest will be taken care of.
okay. So let me make a point on that last element. So I do think that the consumer should be a bit more savvy, but I absolutely do not think that the consumer are experts by any, and nor am I require them to be experts in a particular field. So I'll give an example of like let's say a standards body kind of example, and let's see what you think. So I had a previous debate with Raddy, and there was a debate about the FDA. So I just want to give an example.
Sure.
From like the bad example about the FDA. So the idea with the FDA is that they're incentivized to say no. They are, if they release a product, if they release, sort of medicine, and everyone's happy, great. If they release medicine and like 40 people die or 100 people die, they are the ones that get the blame, so they'll default to no. That's their incentive. Yes, it does stop like some bad medicines from coming through. There was an example of something in Europe that helped women sleep, and it gave deformities to children, and the FDA didn't allow it, so it never occurred. But on the other hand, there was the issue with beta blockers, and beta blockers is something for heart, like it reduces heart attacks. And specifically, those beta blockers this is in the 70s, were already approved in Australia, in Canada, in England. But in the US, it was not approved by the FDA. And it wasn't approved for a while. And in the meantime, tens of thousands of people who could have had that and died of heart attacks could have been saved. So I would say the offset is that because it has this very precautionary principle kind of approach, you don't release medicine that could be saving people's lives. And yes, you stop ones that harm people, but you're killing more people than you are saving. And the idea that I would like to say is, if you take the FDA and you remove it from the government, but you place it in the market, or even maybe a few of these, where you have a sort of either standards body or organization that is paid for by doctors, and it goes and tries to evaluate medicine that will solve particular doctors' needs. So basically, the doctors are saying, look, I don't have time to research all these different medicines, and I want something to represent me and be an expert and like test and look for these things and see if they're effective, and do studies or do meta-analysis or from other studies, and tell me that this medicine can help my patient, and then I will have conversations with my patient. And even like if it can help 80% of the time, but there's a 2% risk of X, then I will have that discussion with my patients, and we can do that. So that is the kind of thing I'm kind of looking for, where you have like these groups that even in consumer electronics, you have these groups that go out, they testing, they hit it with a hammer, they drop it on the floor, they see if a child swallows a button on a toy. They run it through all these varieties of tests, and then say this is good, this is bad, this gets a stamp. Or in the case of the doctors who pay for the service, say this. Recently, we've had this like surge of these 3 new drugs show promise. and we're working on it. We'll give you more information when we get it. And instead of like having even an example of the recent pandemic, which released these vaccines very, very quickly. Typically, it would be 7 to 10 years, and in the meantime, everyone's dying. And in the case of AIDS, there was a lot of like fuss over this, and people started taking even in this pandemic, people start taking what is it, like horse dewormers or something?
Right.
But because they don't trust these big government bodies to tell them the truth, and I want that to like change fundamentally. The doctor is supposed to serve the patient. The doctor asked this group, say, I need good medicine to help my patients, and they're paying for this. And if like, and you can have a few of these for different types of medicine, and if one of them betrays the trust of the thing, then they'll lose confidence and people will stop paying them. So you have like, or like be, I don't know, taken to court or whatever. But that is the kind of replacement I'm looking for the FDA. Well, these groups are looking to solve problems, not to default to saying no.
Right, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that, of course, in different industries, your threshold for accepting entry to market, which is what we're talking about, can be different, and it lets, with regulations, it lets you done well, lets you to sort of fine tune that to an acceptable, or the point that is best, right? But without regulation,
hold on, regulation as a default position in any economics, regulations are the barrier to entry.
But we can agree that the FDA should have a lower threshold of acceptance, or a lower threshold of acceptance, right? We can
but it's incentives. It's incentives. Look, a lot of these things, it's basically comes down to incentives.
Yeah, we can change the incentive. We can tweak the incentive.
We cannot change the incentive. It is baked in.
Yeah, but we can tweak it.
You can, give it metrics, you can give it like, KPIs, but the incentive is built in.
But right, we have an ability to do this tweaking. Will it ever be
okay? Let me explain. Let me give an explanation of what I mean by incentive. So it is very, very key to this whole argument. So I'll have to explain it. Let's say you want to go to a restaurant and it's your money. You're the one paying. So you're both interested in getting good value for your money, and you're interested in enjoying yourself. So incentive here, it's because it's your money and you're the one eating the food, you have a double incentive to get the best restaurant for the best price. Yeah. If your boss at work is saying, go to a restaurant, I'm paying for it. Yeah. You don't have an incentive to pay. You can go to an expensive restaurant, but since you are the one experiencing it, you'd want to have good food. Right. If you are buying a gift to someone, you're not going to experience it, but you are paying for it. So you'll try to get like the best value, but you're not going to experience it. So that's where the incentive. With the case of government, there's two examples here. There's an example and example plus. They take taxpayers' money. It's not their money. They pay to people that they're never going to meet. They have no incentive on either way. Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's fine tune that with the example I gave of the restaurant. Your boss or someone, your boss told you to take the team out for a night out, but you're not going to eat the food. However, your uncle runs a restaurant on the other side, far away on the other side of town. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is literally the government now. This is the incentive. And I'll explain in a second by talking about pork barrel spending. You would tell the people in the office to travel to the other side of town, go to your uncle's restaurant. You pay your boss, you pay like exorbitant fees. They'll give them red wine or whatnot to spike up the price, and the uncle will pay the money. Now you haven't gotten any of this money, but your uncle owes you a favor. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is the incentive in political system. Now pork barrels. I'll give you another example. Pork barrel spending is basically. People start asking, why is the government spending on all these really ridiculous stuff in spending? So, for example, there's a shrimp that had like not a stepper, like a running machine. They invented a running machine underwater for $750,000 for a shrimp to run on a running machine, and they also gave a quail drugs to see how it affect like cocaine, to see how it affected the quail. So it is ridiculous spend. And another good example was they gave like some $41 million to repair a tank that the army did not want. They didn't want it to repair. They wanted it to be gone away. They didn't want to pay anyone to repair it, but they gave the army money to pay to repair this tank. And so it seems like ridiculous spending, but actually it is not ridiculous at all. It is completely on purpose, because in the case of the tank, there were interest groups that wanted the people who repair the tank to be paid money.
Mm-hmm.
So to satisfy the interest groups, who then pay then the army pays the money for these tanks to be repaired, who they don't want that they don't even want the tanks, they rather just let it die or throw it in the bin. The people that got paid to fix the tanks, they got some money, and this belongs to some interest groups, and that was what the point is. This is what's called pork barrel spending, and that is the entire point of the government. Interest groups, and maybe like once in a while to show some visibility that you're actually supposed to do something. But when I say, for example, the regulations is the company did what the government wants, I was really very specific. I really meant it. Consumer protection is a fraction of those regulations. It could be that, take a good example. Amazon is now lobbying the government for a $15 minimum wage, not because it cares about workers, but because it wants to put Walmart, who has like a deal that they give them, they don't pay them $50 an hour, but they give them like cheap food at a discount from Walmart or whatnot. And like all these small shops that like sell books or coffee shop, they'll all go out of business because they can't afford the $15 an hour. And Amazon will pick up like both market share, and they have like what's that, Trader Joe, not Trader Joe, organic food or something, Whole Foods. They have Whole Foods, and they'll take these like small stores that were selling like foods to people. They have like this Whole Foods that will replace it. So they're lobbying the government to pass regulation to literally kill competitors. That's what they'll do.
Like, I understand all that, but I think that, and I don't think you're doing this maliciously, but I think
of course they're doing it to make money. If they destroy the competitor, look, right, if you have an option of spending tons of money of actually providing a better service to your customer, giving better products, or you can just pay a lobbyist like a fraction of that money to pass a law. Mm-hmm. Which do you think they'll do? It's not illegal.
I think that you're doing a trick here, and it's not malicious, but you're doing a trick where you're conflating the current regulatory environment with regulations in principle, right? There are potential regulations in principle which do not have the same incentive structure for the FDA, right? We could give them bonus payments when they approve drugs. We can give them a margin of error on whatever statistical analyses they do, so that like within a higher margin, people could get a side effect from a drug than they initially thought it would. We can increase the margin on that, right? We can do all kinds of things to bring the incentives in line to the type of competitive market environment that we want, right? And we can disincentivize through that regulatory power, right? Again, in a different regulatory environment, in a different way, do regulations than the current ones, right? And additionally, something like the $15 minimum wage, right? You're right about that in as a specific type of regulation, perhaps, but not necessarily in principle that we should have no minimum wage whatsoever, right? Like those are two entirely different arguments to be had here, right? And I think that you're sliding between the two.
So I would say this. I don't think it was. I'm not doing any trick. This is a very, very strong position that myself and other people, or basically, I could be saying that I'm getting some of these positions from the free market and libertarian people that I would follow.
Sure.
It and I don't think you can tweak it very much. I think even in the UK, you can like give KPIs or something like to maybe like get a slightly better result, but it's not. The incentives will not change. And bear in mind that a lot of the people, like I would say, this typically on the left. I'm not saying you are, but they think the solution to a big government is an even bigger government with them running it, with someone on their side running it.
Sure,
it's never it's
my position at all. But yeah, there are these
fair enough.
These degenerate people. I know. Yes, I'm aware of these people.
So I would say like there's certain incentives and certain things that repeat themselves. And I specifically said in my opening statement also that the bigger a market is, the more the government would need to grow to regulate it. The more money that flows it, the government need to regulate it. I am necessarily saying that in America there's a lot of that. There's a lot of money flowing.
Sure.
And the government. Whereas, for example, in smaller countries in Europe, that may not be the case, and they don't have as much corruption. Whereas US that have more, but it is definitely an expected even behavior to see these sorts of things in the market.
But like again, like we haven't tried with the FDA giving them like bonuses or other types of incentives to approve drugs, right? We haven't tried these measures yet. In principle.
I would say again, you can try to give them bonus. I don't know about bonuses because the salaries are fixed, but it's not even a matter of bonus. But let's say you give them KPIs and say we expect this many things. They'll try to stay within the KPIs, but the incentive will be the strongest thing. In general, in economics, like you're talking about incentives, that's like if you boil all economics down, it will be the word incentives. So those aren't changing. The market has differences. So even for, let's take for example the $15 minimum wage. Let's say you say, well, I want $15 because I don't want a $2 minimum. I don't want a $2 an hour minimum, not minimum, unminimum wage, like unregulated. There won't be a situation in the market where that's so low that even though if you put that price, no one will come to work for you because it's just too low, and it's not a benefit to anyone. So there will be like a supply and demand even in that. But for example, even the $15 minimum wage, and this is an argument made a very long time ago. There was I don't know if it's still the case, but it was the case some decades ago where you had like black teenagers had a very high unemployment rate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming like outside when they just finished school, and some people were saying that the part of the problem was that the schooling was very bad for them in the areas where they were, and so they come out of school, they have a very poor education, and then if they were to compete like on price because they don't have a very good education or whatnot, then they could like join the workforce and get on the job skills, which they can then form out of a career. Mm-hmm. But because of the $15 minimum wage, they're like locked out. And
I don't want to get too in the weeds on like the minimum wage topic, and I understand the point. And there's a robust argument there, but again, to sort of convince me to be dissuaded from this proposition, I would need you to prove that there's not a single possible regulation on corporate behavior. So one prohibition or one mandate of corporate behavior, which would not be better suited than allowing the market to take its course, right?
So I don't understand. Could you explain it again?
It's not about proving one specific regulation is bad, right? That's not what would convince me to relinquish the proposition, right?
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that
to win is that we have a more efficient market or and the efficiency, index towards, I guess, something like happiness or whatever, consumer satisfaction.
Right. Hold on. For the proposition though. So specifically, like on free markets and regulate themselves. So I've presented ways of regulation. Right. Now the question is, effectively, is kind of up to you. Now I would say.
I think we're drawing near the end.
Yeah. I would say like if like it's the same as what we have now, or even like a tad better. I think, or I feel I've met that. If it's like a nirvana kind of state, that would be like maybe a longer conversation, which I would maybe need more research for. But at the very least, it's not bad. It's not like, if the government went away, everything will like people like run in the streets naked or something, right?
1 second. So again, Noble RC night. I hope my mic is better, but I need to be. It's worse. Oh God, fuck my life. I will fix this later. But what I need is I need it to be proven that there will not be a more efficient market indexed to something like happiness or consumer satisfaction. If it's not possible to have a better market than a completely free market with at least one regulation. And I think that regulations on fraud and I think the legal stuff that we talked about earlier counts as a regulation because it's a restriction or a mandate on corporate behavior. I hope that came through. And that's sort of what I'm kind of resting my case on. And I think that that's all that I think I can say and all I can do to convince.
Okay.
Yeah, any type in general, any in principle. Anyone that you could think of, it will not be more efficient.
Sorry, so you're giving me like an option to persuade you on something?
Yeah, that's like what I need to be persuaded in, is that there's not a single regulation that we could possibly think of that would make the market more efficient with respect to whatever, right?
Well, then I give the example of the FDA.
Right. But I just think that, yeah, but that's one among many like regulatory bodies. Like we were talking about,
Yeah, but let's just take
pesticide levels in food, right? That seems like a good regulation to have.
I'm not saying that you won't have that regulation or like a regulation or like a standard in the market. And I'm giving an example where there is a body in government right now that is very, very slow to release medicine. To some degree, some people like that. But at the same time, because it's very slow to release medicine, it's killing people. And yes, it is like very harsh on things that may be very negative to people. But like on balance, it's doing more harm than good. And if this were in the private sector and like doctors were the ones paying for this kind of service and it would represent the doctors in this way, then we could potentially see, because the incentive structure has changed, we could see more medicine coming in, more people's lives saved. And if, for example, a medicine is let's say is in like some sort of trials, it's not fully done, but like some trials have been done, and there's an X amount of risk, and it's like so let's say it's like a new medicine, and this patient of a doctor is like this very rare disease, and this medicine could help. And the doctor say, well, look, these are the risks, these are the rewards. Let's discuss. Right now, you don't have that option. Right now, if you compare it to like let's say cars, and I'm thinking, well, I want to buy a second-hand car, I can't afford a new car. The FDA is like, no, you're buying a new car or nothing. You're going to walk to work.
Yeah, I get that. Like, I just still hold out hope that there is some form of regulation about bringing new medicines into the market that will get more medicine to people as much, maybe not perfectly, but much more than we have now, that doesn't also sell people snake oil, right? And that's my fear, is that if you start selling people the long shot craps game slot machine cures, like I'd rather have some regulation than that world where people throw away their money at something that was really terrible, right?
But you do have in the example, it's still the same kind of principle of the FDA, but the incentives have changed. Right. So you're still evaluating these, you're still running tests on them. It's just the incentives have changed.
Right. I just think that like from the third party that's disconnected from being interested by profit motive, corporate survival, competition, etc., having a third party to have some at least very base level restrictions on what you can bring to market. And I think we kind of agree on this to a certain extent, is that having the state as being outside of the market, doing that fundamental work, is required.
Right? Why do you think?
Because you don't want
something is in the market. 1 second. Why do you think because something is in the market, it's now corruptible?
No. It's not about being corruptible. It's not about that. It's just saying when there's no third party check at all on anything.
It is a third party check. It is literally. It is not the same company. It's a different. It's a third party, just not from the government.
Yeah, but now we're back in cheap Chinese shit land, and there's people who will get the cheapest thing no matter what, and there'll be as many standard. You're essentially legalizing paying for Yelp reviews, because now I can pay this company to give me a good rating, right? And if they don't give me a good rating, I'm going to shop to the other guy, right? Because if he's not giving me a good rating, I'm not going to keep going to his business, right?
For argument's sake, let's stick to the FDA example. If someone like bribes this privatized FDA and they give bad reviews they give bad advice as a result of this, then the doctors that are paying for this service will say, well, look, this is bad advice. My patients are being hurt. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to use a different provider.
And so then that's
It's just like this. It's just like this thing. It's just like this mentality that everyone in capitalism will default to the most evil thing possible. Not like, well, look, I want to have a business for the next 20 years. I've invested all this time and money, and I want to serve people. Like, no, this doesn't even register. This like, no, how do I fuck as many people over?
No, it's not about that at all, right? Because now, right, again, like if it's again, you really need to look up the right to repair stuff. But like once you get this market norm in place where certain things are acceptable, these things have like an incredible amount of inertia, right? And on the supplier side, right, if the doctor is no longer caring about the standards board because they hurt his patients, right, then that standard board is going to give them money to keep prescribing the pills that they're pushing in order to push the product, right? Everybody is self-interested to a degree. Does that mean that they're necessarily the epitome of evil? No. Everyone is just self-interested, and when you put dollar signs towards people of certain constitutions, not all doctors will take a bribe, but right then there's a significant enough portion of the population who will take bribes like that if the figure's high enough that you're going to have some real serious negative consequences, and that's my fear. It's not about the vast majority. It's about the stuff that gets through the cracks, that the baseline floor regulations help us to avoid the worst possible situations.
If everyone is self-interested, why doesn't that be expressed as giving the best service or product to a customer for just for the sake of self-interest? Like, the more I do that, the more customers will buy from me compared to everyone else. The more money I make. Literally a feedback loop. The better I treat my customers, the more money I will make. The more money I will pay my shareholders as a result. Literally a feedback loop. Why is it like, how do I screw people over in the short term? Then my company is burned for the next 20 years and the shareholders' share goes to zero. Why is that like the default?
In these days, you do not take a product to market and just throw it to the general population at large. Like, all these products are specifically designed to hit specific market sectors that are very small and niche in certain cases.
Yeah, to serve the value of customers.
As we've talked about, some of these customers, due to them being partially self-interested, being poor, et cetera, right, they have a lower standard, and their demand is heavily elastic, right, to the point where the cheaper product is they're always going to buy it, and you'll have corporations that will be able to leverage that fact through their self-interest and target that specific market and derive their business solely around meeting the specific desires and wants and needs of that market, right? It's not about the market at large.
You can sell cheap, high-value products to this sector and make a ton of money while not trying to cheat them. Just like say, look, I here's a product. It doesn't mean like I'm disrupting. Let's say you're disrupting. I'm disrupting the market. I have a cheaper product. It only does 80% of what the competitors do, but it's good enough, and it's much cheaper. And I'm disrupting the market, and you're serving like a poorer segment, or even any segment really, if it answers the needs. And let's say some people still want to pay more money because they want 100%. That's fine, but but the idea is to give value to the customers. It was never to screw anyone over, and it's not a long-term strategy.
Right, but like, again, the point is that, again, and this is the revolving door of rebranded bullshit, right? If I'm just going to hire a standards board that tells you that my product does 100% of my competitor. And then if it gets out that standard board is bullshit, I'm just going to make a new one, right? Or find.
Then how will the standards board gain the reputation that it just lost? That's a very expensive thing.
Create my own.
Sorry, yeah, but it was zero reputation.
So the general public doesn't know about the different standard boards of all particular industries, right?
What if it does?
What if it does?
What if it goes like this sticker on this product is a standard board or consumer book that I'm familiar with?
Right, but like sure, but most products you don't tend to buy.
Okay, let's flip it around. Let's say is this a 50%? I understand what you're saying. Is this a 50% problem or a 1% problem?
What do you mean by that?
The people that do, as you're saying, like the possibilities of harm and whatnot, or the possibility of cheating people, is it a 1% problem or a 50% problem?
It's a smaller problem. It's a smaller problem.
Okay.
I won't say 1%, but
you understand what I mean, yeah?
Yeah. Right. It's a smaller subset. It's like take vaping for instance, right? Vape products, right? There's no real standards board for that. Everybody puts out their own sticker. You never know if the product is good, right? Because there's no standard set in place, and because it is almost entirely privately regulated, right? There's no incentive for them to create like a unified standard board, right? Because new products come to the market all the time. Like fucking, I went through 3 different vapes until I found one that was actually worth a shit.
How did you find out?
I just kept buying different ones when they broke, right?
And if you wanted to avoid that now, how would you buy a vape that won't break?
I really don't know. I think it's a roulette wheel. I think you just
would you look to review? I don't know. I don't vape, but would you look for some reviews or something?
I looked at reviews, and all of them I had high level reviews. Like all of them said that it was worth the money, that they were good, etc. For all of these.
How did they break then?
Because they're so new. One leaked and just stopped working. It leaked through the bottom and just stopped working. The other one, the charge port broke on it. I liked that one. I really liked that one. The charge port broke on it. And now this one, which I've had for like a year and some change, is finally a decent one. I did pay more money for it, but all of them had good reviews. And I was happy with all of them until they broke.
Okay, fair. I honestly don't know about this this market segment at all.
What I'm saying is like, when you go to these like specific market segments, right? We see even in our current realm where there's like no regulation around them, that you get like bullshit that happens, right? And that's like my grander point. But my brain is starting to get fried. My voice is getting tired.
Okay, let's
adjourn it.
Let's round up. Yeah. So I hope I answered most of the questions. So I guess we're going to go for a vote. But I hope for the proposition I answered most of the cases, or the vast majority of them. I'll just quickly go over like a few things. So I was arguing that markets can regulate themselves efficiently. The example, we actually didn't get into environment, which I had quite a bit on. So indices, channel bodies, like I gave the FDA example, consumer groups, which again, both of these two are experts in their area. Like I gave the example of like testing toys, so the button doesn't come off and the children swallow it. Insurance, we didn't really touch on, but a lot of companies need insurance so they won't get sued. And those can like state certain criteria of what the business should be doing. Recommendation system, we talked about like Amazon and stuff like that, but CoolDog gave an example of how his thing broke, so I'm not sure how well they're okay. Yeah. We discussed market forces about supply and demand, of how you invest in a particular business, you don't want to throw that all away. There's like more incentive to have like a more long-term plan, and not screw over your customers because they'll hear about it and stop buying from you. And we gave the courses, and actually in my notes it says damage and fraud for the court system, but we did. I think bribery. I said I'll go on notice on that to research. That was my closing statement.
Yeah, I think my closing statement is going to be also along these lines. I think that like any type of these fraud, bribery, etc., right, is a type of regulation that the government puts in, which prohibits certain types of corporate behavior, and in such cases constitute a regulation. And I think we both agree that there needs to be a fundamental enforced sort of regulation. Now, if it's a robust set of regulations or a very lean set of regulations, either one will carry my proposition here. And I also just do believe that that without at least some benchmark and potentially regulatory bodies that are incentivized in the right way through social mechanisms and so forth, can eliminate the worst, right? Essentially, I think a maxi-min strategy is a better approach when we're talking about consumer protections and things like that. So you have to ensure some level of baseline, and then let market forces do the finer tuning after we've already reached an acceptable level for the product. And so I do want to say that I really enjoyed this debate. I think that we kept the structure of it extremely clean, and I think that the audience would have heard a very good clash between us, and I'm interested to see how they vote. But I really did enjoy this debate, and I am thinking more now about potentially the goods of